Hey guys, today I'm going to be making bias binding, the bane of all of our existences, with just scraps that I have left over for my project. I wanted my binding to be kind of scrappy anyway, and so I'm going to show you guys what I did. I have kind of like a simple version of this. You can make it as complicated as you want to with whatever scraps you have on hand. The only thing that you're going to want to make sure is that you know where the grain of the cut is of the pieces that you're using. So you're not going to want like all of these diagonal cuts. You're just going to want like squares or leftover scraps from other projects. So here, I'm going to show you guys what I'm doing. I have this table runner, or not a table runner, sorry, a tree skirt that I made that I need bias binding for. And I accidentally overcut and made too many of these pieced randomnesses. Technically, I have enough of these that I could almost make a baby quilt, but who wants a Christmas baby quilt? No one. So, I am just going to sew these together in one straight piece, and then it's going to be super scrappy, but I'm going to go ahead and show you how I'm making bias binding out of this. So the main thing that I'm doing when I'm piecing these together, and you can piece whatever you want together to make scrappy, but you're going to want it to have some width to it so that when you go to cut a 45-degree angle here, you have enough enough width to get a longer strip. And you're going to want enough scraps to make at least half of a yard at a time. If you're making a bigger quilt, you're going to need a lot more than that. For my super big tree skirt, I think it's like 55 to 60 inches in diameter. I'm going to be using somewhere between half a yard and 3/4 of a yard. So I'm just going to make sure that I have that much. And I'm going to actually do a little bit more than that just to ensure that I have plenty. But that's why this is perfect for using scrappy, because I'm not feeling bad about using this yardage up. I'm just going to go ahead and dive into it. And then I'm not, purchasing a yard of fabric and having to do all the calculations for bias binding, which I absolutely despise. I'm just going to sew stuff that I have together already that is extra and then make it work from there. So the main thing that you're going to want to do when you're piecing these, whatever you have together, is just making sure that your seams are nicely nested, because if it's scrappy, you're going to have a lot of seams on the back and it's going to cause issues when you are piecing everything together. So I went ahead and nested my seams. So I pressed my first column up, my second column down. Actually, it's reversed, so whatever. And then when I went and ironed these, I pressed the seam open so that there's one less like bulky spot that we'll have to mess with, because each of these spots are going to be bulky. And then I'm also going to be sewing my strips together, so there will be extra seams in there. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep sewing this. I'm going to add another row right here. So this will be my next row. I will go ahead and iron all my seams coming down this way so that when I sew these together, the seams will be nested again, and then I'll do the same thing and press the seams open. If you only have like 2-inch width of fabric or something like that, that works too, and you could just do 2-inch width of fabric going all the way down, and then you don't actually have to worry about any sort of nesting seams. I'd still recommend maybe pressing your seams open. It's not something that I normally do, but where you are going to have so many seams in here, it might be nice. So I'm going to finish this up, and then I'll show you guys my full length of fabric, and then I'll show you how I'm cutting the bias of the fabric. Okay. So I got all of my fabrics put together here, and I am now just going to, it's really important that my seams and my whole fabric piece is really flat when I am cutting all of this on the bias, or else I mean, it's really easy for it to like stretch one way or the other and for it to kind of get wonky. So unfortunately, because of the nature of the pattern that I was making for this quilt, I wasn't having to be super accurate. Oh my gosh, found baby food on my sweater, mom life. But yeah, I'm needing this to stay super flat while I'm cutting it on the bias. So I'm going to go ahead and spray some best press on this and just kind of starch it so it's really as flat as it can get. And then I'm going to take it over to the ironing, or to the cutting board, sorry, I'm on the ironing board, and show you how I'm cutting it. Okay, so I am about to start cutting my binding. The only thing you're going to need is, you're going to first need to flatten this all out as best you can. That my starch really helped quite a bit. And then you're going to need a ruler with a 45-degree angle. So you can't see it on mine, but it's the Creative Grids. It's their like 24.5-inch ruler or something, and it's like 6 inches wide. 6.5 is what it is. Sorry. So I'm just going to use this, and I'm going to be lining it up with my 45 degrees on the bottom of it. So my 45-degree angle is right here. I'm going to have to scoot this down a little bit. Scoot it as I work with it. Okay, so my 45-degree angle is right here. So I'm just going to line it up with my bottom. And I'm not going to be using this triangle that I cut out right here. Okay, and on this particular ruler, there's a 45-degree angle here and a 45-degree angle here that makes a triangle, and so I can also ensure that my lines are straight, which they are. Both of these are matching up, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this section off. I'm not going to be using it unless I have to, because it's just going to add a whole bunch more seams. So I'm going to cut that off. And I have this little triangle, so I can technically, I'm making my binding at 2.5 inches wide. So technically I could cut some more off of this because I have plenty more than 2.5 inches, but it's just an extra seam. So if I don't need it, I'm not going to use it. I'll just save it for something else or scrap it. So at that point, if you're using this ruler, then you can just line that 45-degree angle that you just cut with your 2.5 inches. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, but I need to make sure that both ends of my ruler are touching my fabric. And I can ensure that I still have that 45-degree angle by matching it up with this bottom 45-degree line. Okay, and you can see, so this is going to be one of my binding strips. You can see that it's like all over the place. It's totally random. And it's kind of fun because it looks like you put a ton of work into the binding when you really didn't. So there's my strip number 1. And I'm just going to keep going on that, matching it up with my 2.5 inch line. And ensuring that I'm at my 45 degrees. There's my second strip. So you can see it's just all over the board, and it's totally crazy. Like, some of these pieces are just going to have like randomness in them. So this is not for, this method is probably not for you if you want for your scrappy binding. If you want all of your pieces like the same amount. if you want them the same length, sorry. I obviously cannot multitask. Okay, so you can see that on this piece, I am going to be needing to move my ruler halfway through. So I just made sure that this is at my 45 degrees. I'm cutting this and then I'm moving it and matching it up with my seams. I'm matching the 45 degrees on one of my seams, and then I'm matching it up with the 2.5 inch right here. So again, totally crazy. Bloop. I'm just going to keep going on this, and I'm going to cut it all the way down. But a couple of tips for if you're trying to calculate how much. And this is the reason that I like doing this method, because I'm not wasting fabric. I don't like to calculate like the geometry of how many strips I need, but I like to just calculate how much of the binding I need. If you are making a tree skirt and you're trying to find out the amount of binding that you need, the equation that I used is just the equation for circumference. And so for my particular pattern that I'm doing it for, which is my Peppermint tree skirt, which you can find on my Etsy store, it ends up finishing around 56 inches. And so I did your diameter times pi gives you your circumference, but then you also need that inner circle and the 2 flap measurements for your tree skirt. And so I ended up doing your 2 pi times your radius plus your 2 radius measurements, and that gives you a little bit extra to work with, and then an inner circle radius or inner circle circumference. So for my particular pattern, like for a 56 inch tree skirt, you're going to need a little bit less than like 250 linear inches of binding. When I go to put these together, you can see, like, if I sew this on the seam right there, that'll match up perfectly. Okay, so I don't have to trim these off to be perpendicular. In fact, it will look better if you don't, because it will kind of follow the same random scrappy pattern. So what you can do is measure the linear inches of these, but some of these end pieces are going to be a little bit wonky. So you'll want to kind of measure it as you go and see, like for this piece, I have a little less than 28 linear inches of binding. Okay, so I need 250. So I basically need 10 of these, which I should not have a problem getting with all of this bind extra that I have. But I'm really not worried about it, because I used the Scrappy binding, I am not wasting any fabric. I am just using my extras to complete my project. So I'm pretty excited about it. I'm going to go ahead and finish cutting these, and then I'll show you a more detailed close-up look on how I am attaching them together, because I know it's a little bit different than attaching a two squares and lining them up, but it's really similar. The only problem is like the little end triangles. So I have these, and I'm wanting this to line up like this with my strip. So if I just flip this over, okay, and I'm going to line it up right there. There's going to be two triangles on either side. So I want the distance from this little V over to the side to be a 1/4 inch seam. And this is the same on all bias binding. This is not just for Scrappy binding. But if I happen to have the other, like if I'm on the other side of my binding and my angles are not matching up here, say that this one actually comes out this way and then down, I can just go ahead and trim. I'll just line it up and then I'll trim it so that it ends up being the same angle as this. So anyway, I want this to be like this with my 1/4 inch seam sticking out. That's about right. So the distance from here to here is 1/4 inch. And because I'm sewing on the bias of the fabric, actually it looks like this one I'm not. But I sometimes pin it so that I don't have it stretching either way. So I'll just like put a pin right here and then run it down and get my diagonal seam. So I'll show you guys that and then I'll show you the finished binding and what I'm doing. Okay, so I went ahead and sewed that 1/4 inch. So you can see that I have this little triangle out here, and then on this other side, it's the same thing. There's a little triangle sticking out there. But when I fold this back, it will be nice in a diagonal seam. My iron isn't actually heated up yet. But then when and you can either press the seam open or press it to one side. I'm just going to press it to one side. My iron still isn't heated up all the way here. By the way, these wool mats are amazing for just having right next to your sewing station because they're so little. But I can do, like if I'm paper piecing or if I'm just doing something small and not ironing out a huge chunk of fabric, it's really nice for me to like not have to get up from my sewing station at all. Okay, so I went ahead and already sewed all of my strips together that I made. And now I'm just going to do it exactly like I would with a regular binding. And I'm going to start on one end here. And I might actually trim this off. But then I will bring it over and I will iron it. And then I will be attaching it with a 1/4, or actually it's a scant 3/8 seam to my tree skirt. So I'll show you guys that when I get there, but first I'm going to go ahead and press this. I'm going to trim this so that it's perpendicular to the edge of my binding. Then I'm going to fold it over and I'm going to go all the way down the length of my binding like that and press it closed so that I have my double-sided binding, and then we'll go from there.